Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for our latest Department of Defense Information Analysis Center webinar that's going to cover DoD's science and technology protection efforts in order to counter foreign influence. My name is Steve Rutherford, and I'm the director of the HDIAC, and we have the privilege of hosting Mr. Christopher Gardner for today's presentation. I want to express my sincere appreciation to all of you for taking time out to join us today for this exciting and very relevant topic. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Defense Technical Information Center. Hey, if you've not checked out DTIC's website, you can find it at www.discoverdtic.mil, and I encourage you to take a look at their myriad offerings. Without DTIC's sponsorship, this webinar series would not be possible. So also, we got to go over a few admin notes as we start out. Please note that all the attendee lines have been muted. So if you got any questions during the webinar, we're going to ask you to submit them using the attendee chat box you're going to see on the left-hand side of the screen. Just put your question in there, and we're going to work to save the last 10 minutes or so of the presentation to go over those questions and discuss them with Mr. Gardner. Please also note that this webinar is being recorded. A link for the recording as well as the slides will be available at the HDIAC website for later download for our registered members. With that, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to today's presenter, Mr. Christopher Gardner. Mr. Gardner is the Acting Director, Maintaining Technology Advantage, and the Director for Science and Technology Protection in the Office of Strategic Technology Protection and Exploitation and the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. Mr. Gardner is responsible for developing options to protect emerging S&T to maintain the DoD's technical advantage over its adversaries. He also has extensive experience within the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the U.S. Army S&T community, including responsibility for S&T protection, research and development, and integration and cooperation with the intelligence community. So it's our distinct honor to host him today, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Chris. Thanks.
Well, Steve, thank you. Actually, I want to thank you and the HDIAC for inviting me to talk to you all today about the S&T protection efforts, especially on this beautiful Thursday afternoon as well. So my goal today in the next 45 minutes to an hour is to provide you a little bit of context for DoD's S&T protection work and show how the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering supports a collaborative S&T environment across the DoD, US, and the interagency as well. Let's see here. Part of the agenda. Today I'll be giving you a little strategic context from the USD, R&E, and Office of Secretary of Defense perspective, a little bit about my organization, and some of the interagency efforts that we are working as well. And first of all, some of the strategic context. So these are really the strategic contexts that are driving all of our efforts and why we are really doing what we're doing both within R&E and within STP&E itself, Strategic Technology Protection and Exploitation. As you are keenly aware, our nation and the department face various challenges and considerations to our military and technical dominance. Some including, but not exclusively, the rapid technological change and the resulting development and procurement challenges of that technology and how we actually procure those technologies as they are rapidly changing. We are currently in a great power competition, especially from strategic competitors, Russia and China. And how do we as a department preserve our technological advantage from unwanted diversion, exploitation, or transfer, all within this strategic environment and context. One of the main things that helps drive this for the department is the National Defense Strategy. And all three lines of effort from the National Defense Strategy are relevant to our efforts, especially in the area of S&T protection and research security initiatives. So building a more lethal force requires a focus on protecting the weapons, systems, and supply chains that contribute to our warfighters' lethality. We can strengthen our alliances and attract new partners, both indigenously and internationally, by sharing best practices in S&T protection with our domestic partners, such as our labs, our Department of Energy labs, and our international allies. And we really can reform our business efforts by developing standard and transparent guidance for S&T protection and research security, much of which we'll go into a little more detail here in a moment. What I'm showing here are the DoD technology modernization priorities. And so these are supportive of the NDS lines of effort and are used to help focus some of our department's efforts, primarily in the science and technology and emerging capabilities areas as well. And there are 11 of them, and you can see the 11 right there. And it is really our collective responsibility across the department to protect the research and development going on in these areas so that we can achieve and maintain technological advantage, both for our warfighters today and for the future. And just to give some context of where USD R&E, the Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, sits within the broader Office of Secretary of Defense. USD is one of the many USDs, and then we actually work very closely across these in the technology protection landscape, both with USD acquisition and sustainment, with policy, which has several offices that do drive protective actions and actually manage some, and also with USD INS, because they have a role in the protection as well. And actually, we'll revisit a little bit more specifically down in the lower part of the chart structure shortly, just showing where we fit within even the R&E landscape itself. So the USD R&E mission is really pretty straightforward. We're here to ensure technological superiority by setting the technical direction for the department while championing new capabilities, concepts, and activities throughout the research and engineering enterprise. And then we also support the modernization priorities by looking for new pathways to innovation and utilizing and accelerating delivery of the right capabilities to the warfighter, both directly and typically through acquisition and acquisition programs. And within my organization itself, STP&E, Strategic Technology Protection and Exploitation, falls under DDR&E for Research and Technology. So I am the full-time director for S&T Protection, and currently the acting director for the Maintain Technology Advantage as well. Within my organization, there are actually 3 integrated lines of effort focusing on supporting the mission to promote and protect technology advantage and counter unwanted technology transfer to ensure warfighter dominance through assured and resilient systems and a healthy, viable national security innovation base, which I do in partnership with Resilient Systems led by Ms. Melinda Reed, and also the Technology and Manufacturing Industrial Base led by Mr. Rob Gold. And then to provide some context across our organization, these are the primary 21 activities that we're trying to work to drive technology protection across the department. As you can see, the highlighted ones are more specifically in the S&T protection area, but they are all interrelated and self-supporting as well. So one of our main drivers, and I'll get to this in a little bit, is to drive technology area protection plans, kind of identifying what's important, and then other activities by Resilient Systems this year are to protect the supply chain for the critical technologies. And TMIB is really focusing on initiatives to build a strong domestic industrial base and manufacturing network that has the skills and resources to adequately both develop and protect the emerging technologies, primarily in the technology modernization priorities from earlier. So that should provide just a little bit of background and context about where we reside. So the next couple of minutes will actually be spent on what we, the department, are actually doing in trying to drive for science and technology protection efforts. And one of the key things is I get a lot of questions about why is S&T protection even necessary? And part of that comes from a lot of historic ways the U.S. established our research community, but then the way that some of our strategic competitors are actually taking advantage of some of what we do and our openness. So the National Strategy for Critical and Emerging Technologies, which STP&E, our organization, contributed to, was released in October, November of 2020. really outlines the threats facing our S&T enterprise from the great power competition of both Russia and China. And these threats directly relate to the National Defense Strategy lines of effort, both in the loss of classified and unclassified classified and unclassified controlled information and data, both of which decreases our lethality, hurts our standing and collaboration from our partners and international partners, and is extremely costly from a national defense perspective and a national economic strategy and strength perspective as well. So what are we doing about trying to help drive some change and challenge the status quo in the systems? So recently, over the past 2 years, USDR&E has done a couple of activities. Some streamlining guidance and some providing new guidance out to the department, primarily internally to the agencies. So one of them specifically I want to highlight is the new DOD Instruction 5000.83, which was co-led by both myself and Ms. Melinda Reed in Resilient Systems, is really to establish and bring the program protection activities that were already ongoing in acquisition, but apply them across the whole RDT&E lifecycle to include science and technology. So this is something new to the DoD science and technology community to have to do some of these activities. But it also strengthens some of the system security and cybersecurity technical activities, a more focused look at hardware, software, and cyber vulnerabilities, and really trying to address some of the supply chain exploitation as well. I will actually go over this a little bit more. If you have any questions on that, feel free to reach out to me or Ms. Reed as well. So as part of the 5000.83, we really drove it to try and pull a number of activities together, providing kind of a comprehensive view of how all these different piece parts fit together to provide a tailorable and integrated solution for S&T protection specifically. Two of the new items that were in this instruction are really trying to drive new behaviors across the department. One is the technology area protection plans, and these really identify key technology areas and provide boundaries and guidelines to various stakeholders about communications, messaging, and protections. There's a whole new requirement for S&T protection plans for the S&T community, and it really is to serve as a management tool to implement risk-based protections for the emerging technology areas across all the military services, DARPA, MDA, DITRA, and the like. And it also strengthens the program protection plans as a management tool for the acquisition programs and system security engineering activities. Now, how do these all fit together, at least from an S&T perspective? So the 5000.83 came out in July. It directed two new areas, or two things, the technology area protection plans and an S&T protection plan. So as guidance, we have the TAPs. I will go into that actually next, and then driving it with the S&T protection guide. But then for the S&T community, we're also working through what are some of the tools, templates that actually you will need to develop and to drive the protection. And some of that will be risk assessments and then actually some protection plan templates. And I'm working across the Department of Defense with all the services and agencies to actually work through these processes so that we have a consistent implementation across the department. And that includes, in the bottom right, you can see that includes DARPA, Army, Air Force, Navy, MDA, and DITRA as well. So I guess one of the first question is what is a technology area protection plan and its use? So it really is the technology area protection plans were developed for each of the technology modernization priorities, and really to provide consistent and horizontal guidance out to the community that as they're developing the technologies, you need to look at the emergence and the state of the art versus state of the world to determine if this is something that we actually do want to put a little more protections around as it moves out of basic research into applied research as well. It is also, so that's to the S&T community. It is also using to help focus the counterintelligence, security, and law enforcement activities as to here's what the department thinks is important in each of these areas. How are they going to then align their efforts to support the department in those critical technology areas? Another key thing is we're really trying to scope these protection measures so that they are truly on those things that are important and actionable, so that we don't stifle innovation and can leave everything else open for the department and then our innovation-based and industrial-based to actually continue working kind of as we've done for the past 70 years in driving the innovation. But some of the things we actually need to look at a little bit more closely and put protections around. And the TAP is trying to help provide that guidance across the DoD, but also the interagency. So these are also shared with some of our interagency partners to inform federal guidelines. And some of those are more like the critical and emerging technology strategy that I mentioned earlier. So the TAPs, if they're consider them high-level guidance to the department. The other aspect is as the department services and agencies are developing their new programs, they really need to consider a risk-based approach to identify what is critical within their research areas and document that as well. So what it is the S&T Protection Guide offers a sample process for the services and agencies to develop kind of the S&T Protection Guide and figure out what is important and to document. And then as they go through that, much like a protection plan, start addressing it with, okay, if this is important, what do we need to do from a countermeasure standpoint or a risk-based standpoint to actually protect the technologies, which may be different in S&T than they are in acquisition. And then providing kind of a best-based practices across the department for some consistency in the emerging technology areas as well. So this is in final revisions now and should be out for more public reference here within the next couple of weeks to months. So a guide doesn't do anything if you don't have some kind of guidance about what are the aspects and attributes that you actually need to look at. So in addition to the guide, the working group that we have also developed a template with all of the types of questions that you want to ask as you're trying to identify what is important, what the risks are, and then what you do about it. So this is something that we've put together that will be out also as guidance for the department to tailor to each of the services and agencies, S&T organizations, to implement themselves. Because each organization, one has a different structure about how they do their science and technology. They have a different structure on how their counterintelligence supports them and intelligence supports them as well. So this is something that needs to be developed in a collaborative manner with the program managers and their security and intelligence, and in many cases also their contracting, as to how what's important and how they're going to implement it as well. This should also be out within the next couple of weeks to months for more public viewing and reference. So the third area is really trying to develop a kind of a detailed risk assessment. So as we've come down from having high-level guidance with the DOD Instruction and then the S&T Protection Guide, one of the things that we're getting across the department is the question of how do you do a risk assessment in science and technology or even basic science when you don't even know the end application for the technology? So part of what we're trying to do is an actionable set of questions that can help guide the S&T managers and the organizations to help them determine what the risk is to the service or agency and the department in each of these areas. And really looking across 4 of the broad areas to help inform the risk. Really, what is the importance of the technology to the department and or the service and agency? Do we know about foreign intentions in the same technology areas? Where do they stand with their development? Might they come after some of our developments to help further their capabilities? What do we know about the individuals planning to do the research or the companies looking to do the research? And then the same thing with the institutions, especially in the earlier science realms, who's doing the work as well. And this is also providing some tailorable questions. This is not as far along in the development as the guide and template, but this is also something that we're working with a intra-service and interagency types of questions as well to really inform the decision process of risk and should things be awarded, how are they awarded, and in what type of forum, fully open, controlled unclassified, or classified forum should the work be done. So none of this is very useful unless people know about it and understand it. So I have a line of effort as well within my organization, really trying to work on education and training. As of today, through the Defense Acquisition University, we've incorporated some of the basic awareness into the Science and Technology Manager 101 course. That will be kind of the first time that people and new people will see kind of the S&T protection requirements. We've also developed for the DOD kind of a briefing on security fundamentals for S&T professionals. So what does security mean to S&T, and what are the different attributes you need to think about as well? In progress, we have some additional activities. We're trying to develop some of the best practices and resource guides. That's really what we just talked about with the S&T Protection Plan Guide and Detailed Risk Framework. And then trying to integrate some of these activities into broader education as well. I'm currently working with Defense Acquisition University on incorporating these activities into the Act 160 Program Protection Planning training module as well, and expanding that. In addition, we're working some other activities because this is relatively new. How do you identify what's important when you haven't really decomposed your S&T project, especially if it's more towards prototyping, into what are the critical aspects and state of the art versus state of the world? So we're also looking and working through some technology decomposition training, very similar to what's done in an acquisition program for program protection, but in trying to adapt it for some of the broader research areas within S&T. And then kind of the other education part is coming to forums like this, one to make people aware and show who is doing the different aspects and who you need to reach out to as well. And just as a kind of a background information, when you go download the slide, each one of these are hyperlinked. And they really provide links to the different types of activities, reports that have gone on over the past. This one only shows about the past 6 years, and the reports that go with it. Things like one of the ones that for the department helped highlight and kick this off is the Defense Innovation Unit's China's Technology Transfer Strategy that really came out in January of 2018. Really accelerated some of the department's efforts and concerns there. And for the academic side of the house, the very bottom right one is the National Security Presidential Memorandum 33, which is an interagency effort to really try and drive some consistent action across the all federal department science funding agencies, really to just drive home that the U.S. is all about integrity and transparency. And for those that choose not to work within that structure, try and take action as well. So this is more of a reference and give you some idea of the activities going on after the fact, and access with links to them. And kind of as a takeaway is the department is really trying to expand the ability to do technology protection even down into the S&T, but doing so in a measured manner that doesn't stifle the innovation. That's one of the reasons that I'm working with the principal directors in each of the technology modernization areas to really articulate what is critical in each of the technology modernization areas. really crafting actionable policy and guidance with the intra-service across the DoD to make sure that what we're putting in place is actionable and is trying to be done consistently across the services and agencies. Because in S&T, many of the technology areas are funded by Army, Navy, Air Force, and DARPA, but for their specific applications. So we want to ensure some consistency across each of those areas, which is why we have some of the horizontal guidance. But not doing that in a vacuum, because what we're trying to do is develop some education and training tools for the DoD enterprise to ensure that the awareness is out there and is being done consistently. But then also outreach, which is why I thank Steve for allowing me to do this on the HDIAC event, is outreach to our small business community, our industry community. I have several engagements on the international that also have some concerns in these areas, and then the interagency through the National Security Innovation Base. And finally, we're doing our best to work across the interagency to ensure that the department is developing policies and procedures that are in line with the interagency. On the science side, especially those like National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health, Department of Energy, and NASA. And if you need to contact me, I did provide my email address at the bottom. My director, Dr. Robert Erie, is a director for STP, and my partner in crime, who works some more activities at Edge on Science and Technology, but also in acquisition, Brian Hughes, works the Joint Acquisition Protection and Exploitation cell as well. And with that, took about a half hour. Leave it open for questions. Thank you very much.
Well, Chris, thank you very much, and you did inspire a number of questions. So, again, I appreciate you leaving time for us to go over those things, so let's go ahead and hit them. A recent term, that at least recent to me, in vogue, is military-civil fusion, being part of the Chinese Communist Party's expansive approach to stealing tech, as well as intellectual property. And, I think the goal of that is to mobilize the whole society. Every business, every individual is incentivized and even compelled to participate. So that's pretty expansive, and it's going to create a lot of difficulties for the civil and the DoD sector to interact with anybody, certainly anybody that interacts with Chinese, certainly the Chinese themselves. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You articulated it absolutely correct. The military-civil fusion in their structure is any and all of the Chinese entities are readily open and available for military capability. So one of the reasons we're trying to develop these areas and what's critical, so the department can decide who do we actually want to award and collaborate with. So it is a challenge, and it's something that the acquisition side is somewhat aware of, and we're trying to bring that awareness into the science and technology community as well. So what you've articulated is absolutely correct, and we just need to be able to go in with our eyes wide open on who we are collaborating with, and then also on the criticality of the technology developments that we're doing and who we want to collaborate with as well.
So that kind of segues us to a question that Gabrielle McKess asked, who's one of our regular participants here. And you covered the education in, for example, the DOD Acquisition University, the DOD policy, which obviously DOD entities, program offices, PEOs are going to be bound by. However, a lot of the cutting edge technology being developed, for example, at Silicon Valley, not bound so much, yet a lot of intellectual property there, a lot of stuff that DoD may use spinoffs of. Have you given any thought to how to incorporate this sort of thing within the civil community, perhaps even integrating it? Gabrielle asked about integrating it into education curricula at some of our tech universities.
Great question, and almost like a leading question. So when we get to that realm is You're absolutely correct. A lot of the innovation that the department desires is done outside of the department and even our normal defense contracting community. In the area of especially the emerging base, the federal government stood up what's called the National Counterintelligence Task Force, NCITF, which the DOD and FBI primarily are helping to drive. What they are actually doing right now is exactly what you talked about, trying to provide some of the education about what is going on, especially with the military-civil fusion that you brought up, to the broader community. So within the academic realm, they are doing a number of kind of home-on-homes in different sections of the country to engage the academic realm and the startup realm about here's what's going on, and here's what you need to be aware of when you're approached by companies, venture capital, and other activities. So that education is going on primarily through these National Counterintelligence Task Force communities, which are kind of jointly both the DOD, FBI, and now other agencies are also joining in to help with some of this education and training out to the broader communities. In the academic realm, there is one that is actually a consortium. It's not a consortium. It's the Academic Security and Counter-Exploitation Working Group. It's led by Texas A&M, is really bringing in the academics into this realm to try and understand as well participants, defining what's critical, and get the education out as well. Over.
Great, thank you for that. So Anna Stencil asks, she goes, does your program address methods used by non-traditional collectors with who use theft of information via downloading, transmitting, copying data, that sort of thing? It also appears that she's talking a little bit about it like in the insider thread as well.
So kind of. I say it that way because what we're trying to drive now is, at least from a department standpoint, trying to identify what is important and critical. So in theory is, if you identified something as important and state that it's controlled unclassified information, then that CUI should be protected by whatever performer is using it. And some of those are the cyber security and defense capabilities, DFARS 800, 171, 172 as they come out. So it's not on the defense side and prohibiting it, but as we're going through and identifying what's important, the protection attributes can then get to things such as applying the cybersecurity and any of the other protection mechanisms that we start putting in place. So that would be a result of what we're doing.
I see. Thank you very much for that. So, and that actually leads to another question from Joseph. I'm sorry if I butcher his name, Pomeringing. How will factors in and of these considerations also play into determination of R&E efforts being public, or they're going to go CUI, as you said, or classified? And then he asked if there's going to be a dynamic between the considerations. I think you'll say there has to be, but particularly when it comes to continuing to involve academic researchers. Indeed, there's going to be a lot of challenges. I know, for example, sometimes it can be difficult to hire people because in our academic, we want to hire, like I want to hire interns, for example, but they're not U.S. citizens. So do you have any thoughts on that?
No, great question. The efforts that we're trying to do here are actually trying to make that easier from a decision standpoint. So as we do the upfront risk assessment, that's part of the S&T protection plan. That from the DOD side of the house, we should be determining what should be done full and open, what should be done as CUI, and then what should be done at potentially other classifications as well. As you determine the type of realm for the work to be done, will kind of alleviate the challenges there. If we choose that this work is to be done open, then we do it open with full publications and then without restriction as well. As we decide then to go into controlled unclassified information, that's where the department will then need to decide, okay, do we need to pull that in-house because it is so sensitive, or do we need to be awarding our efforts with some of the protection clauses in the contracts that we award? Over.
Super, thanks. So in your experience, and we've gotten a couple questions about it, really not in your lane regarding the recent, I don't think in your lane, regarding the cyber attack on the Colonial Pipeline. But I did want to ask you, what do you see as the greatest threat vector for this leakage, if we will, of U.S. intellectual property in science and technology? What in your experience are the vectors that the bad guys are using?
I don't think there is one. The vectors that are being used primarily are the ones that have been found that have ambiguity around the edges. So when we have clear rules on CFIUS, we have clear rules on export controls, we have some clear rules on IP, and our strategic competitors are finding ways around our legal system. So they finding ways that aren't illegal, but are kind of in the gray zone to try and obtain what they need and by any means possible. So it's not any one.
Well, that kind of leads me to my next question. How much interaction, what is your office doing with, Adil Khan actually asked this, what does your office do? How much interaction do you with our allies? How much of this is a collaborative effort with the Five Eyes countries to ensure that we're all singing from the same sheet of music?
Absolutely great question. The answer is yes. We are actually beginning those conversations. The big challenges, we started some of those just before COVID hit, and then COVID hit a little over a year ago, and a lot of those type of conversations, for various reasons, kind of stalled for a while. So we are now getting questions from our allies and partners on what do we do about some of these challenges, and how do we collaboratively work the S&T protections together. So as the department typically does, we're starting with kind of the Five Eyes and working our way out, primarily because there are easier structures under Five Eyes to do some of this type of conversation, and then moving our way out to some of the other international partners as well to work through how, if we're going to do collaborative developments, and as we do collaborative developments, how do we ensure that we are taking into account each country's national equities, each country's laws, and then how do we protect things consistently across the countries? Over.
Super. Thank you very much for that. So along those lines of partnerships, David Lohman asks if you or your office is involved with the FBI's, and I'm not familiar with this, the FBI's InfraGard efforts, especially with the infrastructure areas in government facility, critical manufacturing, and the defense industrial base.
So somebody in our office is, my focus has been on science and technology, and so I have not been directly involved with that. Over.
Okay. So Eric Carlson asked something kind of specific, and I'm going to ask it a little bit more broadly. He goes, how can we limit the announcements of what we were doing in the DOD, RD, and TME world that alerts our adversaries and gives them some insight? I've kind of, in this job, lived in both worlds. A number of our partners and subcontractors are academics, and as you're acutely aware, their careers depend upon publishing. And I think in America, we also want to make sure that we're showing the taxpayer what they're getting for their dollar. So in your mind, how do we strike that balance between showing what we're doing, allowing people to publish, yet at the same time protecting our defense industrial products and intellectual property?
There's a whole bunch of answers wrapped up in that question. Let's see if I can parse a couple of those out. Especially on the publishing and academic side, we absolutely need that to be done, because we need the broad ideas from around the globe, not just from within the U.S., to be able to drive some of our future capabilities. That is part of why we're trying to drive kind of the S&T protection guide and the risk assessment is, department, truly decide what you want to have done in the open. The open science is absolutely critical for our future capabilities. What we can do beyond that is, as we start putting out our broad agency announcements and solicitations, when we have more department specific needs, is structuring the BAA and solicitation on what we need, not necessarily in a alignment with, and here's why we need it, and here's how it's critical. So we put a little too much in a little too much openness in our solicitations and announcements out there. So that's part of what we're trying to do with our guidance, is truly think about what you're asking for and just ask for it, as opposed to also saying, and here's why we need it. I'm not quite sure if that answered all of his question.
Well, it was quite the mouthful, and I think it is that awkward position that we all find ourselves in. And I think these very webinars that we do for the public often skirt that issue, and we go through extensive reviews, as you're very well aware.
Absolutely.
We present and post these slides, and for good reason, for certainly. So I think we've got a couple more questions. So how do we do you think we collaborate with some of the nations, and we'll use again the Chinese Communist Party as an example, who have openly, they make no secret about it, that they are actively gathering. We routinely will go to an air show and see something that looks remarkably like a U.S. fighter jet with Chinese insignia on it. Yet at the same time, there are areas for non-competitive collaboration. I think space exploration is a good example of that we have limited ourselves there. How do we strike a balance there?
From a department perspective, that's all about the risk assessment and then choosing who we work with. As I've said, the best minds in the world aren't necessarily from the U.S. We need to pull them from all backgrounds, ethnicities, and countries to be able to drive both the economy, but then capabilities for the U.S. and the world. So what we're just trying to do is ensure that we make a conscious decision about who we work with and what we work with them on in a collaborative and transparent manner. And that's one of the challenges that has happened historically up till now, is that transparency hasn't necessarily been there. And that's part of the risk assessment that we're trying to drive forward, especially in those 4 areas: knowing the technology, knowing the threats, the institutions, and the individuals, is making a conscious decision about who we work with and why we're working with them. Over.
Okay. So, and I think we got this last one. I don't see any others coming in. I think the last question I'll ask you, this is something we ask a lot of our presenters. You have a lot of experience, sitting in the Pentagon. You certainly see a lot of information and a lot of areas where we've been successful and a lot of areas where we've been not so successful. Do you have any tactics, techniques, procedures, SOPs? Do you have any best practices that you would offer to somebody, say, working in a program office to make sure that we are protecting our science and technology?
That is a great question. A couple. One is being aware of what is going on in your whole technology area and community. Being from a science and technology, sometimes we tend to think we're the smartest person in the room, and we may or may not be. But collaboration with our partners, both inside and outside the government in the technology area, one, to understand what is the state of the art and state of the world. From a protection standpoint, and this is something that is relatively new to most S&T organizations, you need to be able to pull in and collaborate with your security, intelligence, and counterintelligence support as to what their view on your technology is and what they're seeing from both the reporting and the active actions in the technology area as well. That is something relatively new to most, And some of the department agencies may not be currently structured to support everyone on a day-to-day basis, but that's also why each of the services and agencies need to articulate and decide what's critical to prioritize those resources, security, intelligence, and counterintelligence, along with the S&T program managers that are absolutely brilliant in the areas that they work. Over.
Well, Mr. Gardner, thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate the overview and all the work that your office is doing on behalf of DOD in the United States. Again, thank you for leaving a wealth of time for questions. We had a lot of them. You inspired a lot of thought, and thank you for that. And to our audience, thanks so much for joining us today. And as I mentioned at the beginning of today's webinar, and you've seen it pop up in the chat box, the slides and recording this presentation are going to be made available shortly for download at the HDIAC website, which you can find at www.hdIAC.org. And if you're interested in learning more about the IACs or just getting involved as a subject matter expert or a presenter or expanding your presence in the user community, please feel free to reach out to us directly. You're going to see some contact information on the left-hand side of the screen. We're always on the lookout to add to our database of subject matter experts and also build dialogue and build our user community. In addition to monthly webinars like you've participated in today, the HDIAC also offers monthly podcasts. We've got a couple exciting ones. I did an interview with the last Commandant of the Marine Corps a couple weeks ago, and we're eagerly waiting for approval to post that one. We also send out biweekly email digests, the next one going out next Wednesday. And we also host a technical inquiry service with up to 4 free hours of technical consulting. And then finally, we can perform customer-funded work in any of our technical areas, as we are on a pre-competed contract vehicle that makes it really simple to contract with us to do more involved work. We can have your efforts on contract and underway in as little as 6 to 8 weeks. So take a look at that. There's information on our website as well as the DTIC IAC page on their website. So again, look at that contact information in the chat box. And if you enjoy our products, please like us and follow us on social media as well. And then finally, be sure to join us on 25 May for a webinar titled Modernization of Hazmat, Seaburn, Personal Protective Equipment. Many of you joined us. We had, I think, nearly 700 viewers for Dr. Christina Baxter's last presentation. Many of you will call her, and she'll be doing that for us on the 25th of May. I think many of you know her as the Chief Executive Officer of Emergency Response Tips and really an expert in the Seaburn defense and particularly the hazmat personal protective equipment field. She works in the NFPA, on the NFPA boards, and she's always a great dynamic speaker. So I ask you to think about joining us for that in a couple of weeks. And then, Chris, thanks again. Thanks everyone for their time today. Best regards to all of you, and continue to stay well.